Hey guys, Jester Borris with I Want to Be a GM here, and this is Dungeons and Dragons Through the Realm Spelljammer. Woo! That's right, Troy. We're going to space today.
Out in space.
So, as always, with me here, he's got his phone on. Always.
My phone.
It's all right. So, Troy, the Planescape guy, and we are joined by somebody who's finally found a body.
I have a body!
He has a body. This is Mr. Producer.
Yeah. I found a body just in time to hurt myself.
Woo! Yeah, you did. So, again, thanks for being with us. Dungeons and Dragons Through the Realms Spelljammer. I hope you guys out there had a chance to pick these books up. It's a 3-book set, lots of really cool art, and gives you a ton of options for combining the different settings now that we've got to have access to in Dungeons and Dragons. But Spelljammer is not new to Dungeons and Dragons, is it, Troy?
It is not new, but like a lot of the material that Wizard of the Coast is bringing back.
Yep.
Spelljammer is a world setting that when we were looking at doing the series of world settings, you're like, Spelljammer has to be one because it came out in second edition in 1989 was the original box set release. 1989, yes, that's probably longer ago than most of you have been alive playing D&D today. However, they released the original box set, and then they came out with tons and tons of other stuff, and it was a huge hit for several years. And then other things happened, and things changed, and blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
So there's been a lot of changes and updates between 2nd and 5th edition, but all that old material is still valid for your game.
Absolutely. It doesn't take just a few minutes to pull out some of that old material, use the story, put the mechanics of 5th edition, that's what you're playing, put the mechanics in there when you need an armor class, you got to do weapon damage, you got to do something that you need the mechanics of 5th edition, use the story material from 2nd edition.
Yeah. So I'll read this real quick, Troy, and we'll get going. So, home of the stars and gateway to the heavens, the astral plane teems with excitement and possibility. With the help of magic known as spelljamming, that's right, as a verb, spelljamming, you can cross the oceans of wild space, ply the silvery void known as the astral sea, and hop between the worlds of Dungeons and Dragons. So, anybody that's playing Dragonlance, you're in Kryn space. We've got gray space for Greyhawk,
yep.
Realm space. So you can take your Forgotten Realms characters and throw them into the sun.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, technically, you would actually be crashing into the sun because you're in space on a spaceship. So,
well, the Spelljammer ships weren't only space worthy. There were some that were earthbound.
Yeah.
So you could get in a ship and go to the other side of the world very quickly, as opposed to riding your horse.
I mean, well, we do have several examples of some oddly shaped ships, but there are also several examples in the 2nd edition of like literal Spanish galleons flying through space.
Yeah, so
that is where the fun comes in, my friend. You have a Spanish galleon with 3 decks of cannon, and you do a broadside.
Yes,
take
sir.
that, you space orcs.
Yeah. Space hippos. Yeah, any of them. You have a very respectable ship when you can do that, my friends.
So tell us a little bit more about it, Troy.
Well, it came out in 1989, but the Spelljammer, he used it as a verb. Here it is as a noun. The Spelljammer is a legendary ship.
The Spelljammer.
The Spelljammer. Yeah, it's not underlined. It's a legendary ship which looks like a giant manta ray, like from the ocean. Mm-hmm. And it houses an entire city on its back. So it's a very good size. It's a pretty good size. And there's a whole lot of other things about it. In a 2nd edition, there's adventures to go to it and to go away from it, and it's just a large city in space. So, and it's always going somewhere else.
Yeah.
So you don't know where it is. Well, you know where it was. So trying to find it is always an interesting thing. Here's some of the races that you can expect to find there. Then we have an interesting discussion like we did earlier.
Yeah.
Alien races inhabiting the Spelljammer universe include, but are not limited to,
Xenomorphs,
humans, dwarves, beholders, Niagi, Gif, which is the hippopotamus, arachnids,
You'll see him on the show off.
and space orcs called Skro. Space orcs, we've all seen them in Star Wars, right?
Yeah.
and this mysterious arcane trichine insectoids, gnomes, Ilithiids, and were another major race, but were presented as a more mercantile instead of overtly evil, trying to eat everybody's brain. The Monsters Compendium series added many more races, and the Hadozi were also introduced into the setting and later incorporated into 3.5 rules and so on and so forth.
Yeah, the Haduzi is how I've heard that.
That's what I said.
So we've got a lot of new player options out of this expansion. We have a lot of new threats. We see some old threats come to the forefront.
In new and interesting ways to kill your friends.
For sure. So one of the first modules for 2nd edition that was a great intro module to introduce Spelljammers. A ship rocks up to your city, drops anchor in the city square. And so, for some reason the module has your party climb up the rope, but you get up there and you find a space captain and his crew, and he needs help.
Yeah.
But you find out later through the machinations that it's a polymorph beholder, and all of his crew is polymorph farm animals, and so
that's why he needs help. Is yes, the pig is a person now, but it still has the intelligence of a pig, so he's not quite crew worthy.
Yeah, when you tell him to man the tails, he's like,
oink.
I'm not a man.
But so beholders featured very heavily, Illithids featured very heavily. And it was very, very interesting in how you would come across them. So
the beholders, and we'll think back here on some of your deep dungeon dives and some of the monsters you're fighting as you got at a higher level. Mm-hmm. Beholders, Lithiids, mind flayers, and the like, and other things that go bump in the night in the bottom of dungeon.
Bumping the Underdarks.
Those creatures are not native to this world setting. They came from somewhere out there.
Yep. So
they traveled on a Spelljammer from their home world.
Came from somewhere out here.
somewhere.
Well, that's the plains, fool.
Somewhere. So as they came here, now you've got beholders and Lithiids, mind flayers, and all these other creatures that go bump in the night that are not native to this world setting. And so we were talking about earlier, there's 3 reasons why somebody from here goes out there. And they're truly explorer, want to see what's there.
Yep.
They are there for military conquest, take over the area.
Yep.
And exploitation of natural resources that you may have, be it gold or water or food, whatever.
Yeah, for sure.
That's why they're here. Mm-hmm. One of those 3 reasons.
Oh, so the Illithid are only here to set up an amusement park?
Yes. Set up an amusement park. Absolutely.
So the setting has got a lot of really neat things, and it came out before Planescape and was the first setting that sort of bridged the gap between everything that we had available at the time.
Yes.
So you could find Mystara, you could go to Greyhawk, you could go to the Forgotten Realms. Mm-hmm. Dark Sun was one of those things actually that was kind of interesting, where it was lost to time and space because they didn't want like that magic coming into that world setting.
Yeah.
But as a game master, you could literally go anywhere and have that, really sort of shake up Dark Sun when a magic spaceship comes into that world setting.
Oh man.
So one of the things we played around with it. I have a handbook over here. It's Viking campaigns.
Oh yeah.
So we had 3 Viking ships as Spelljammers that were showing up at different places and doing raids. Because they could go all kinds of places then.
Oh yeah.
And nothing is more scary than 300 Vikings that just jump out of the sky.
Yeah.
And take everything.
Space elves, sky Vikings.
Yeah. As soon as you start adding this kind of transportation into your campaign that you're playing, mm-hmm. it opens up so many options for your players. I strongly advise you to try to consider the things that you as a player would do to screw up the storyline, so you don't do those as a DM. Don't give them the options of that. If you give them cannons, make sure they're too heavy for them to carry.
Oh yeah,
don't give them deck guns that they can carry.
Some of the features of the system include like normalized gravity. It's very much it's not sci-fi space. It's fantasy space. So we're not going full Star Wars. We're not going on walkabouts outside the International Space Station. So, it's very fantasy heavy, very fantasy friendly, but it does open up, if you thought a pirate campaign was cool, now you're doing ship-to-ship combat in a swirling asteroids field.
Yeah.
Or you're going whaling for space whales.
Well, so that scene from the Pirates of the Caribbean where they're on the
tidal wave, yeah.
Right, replace the tidal wave whirlpool with the ring of a black hole that you're orbiting, firing guns.
Someone's going into the abyss, and it's not going to be me.
Somebody's going to have a bad day.
But, it's just very fantasy, and so you don't have to worry about spacesuits. You don't have to deal with gravity, and we're not super concerned with a lot of those things you're going to find in a setting like Star Trek or Star Wars.
For those of you who are completely unfamiliar with Spelljammer and heard a little bit about it, the ships are considered to have their own air bubble pocket that's around and surrounds the ship.
I didn't see any of
So as long as they're in that pocket, as long as that pocket is not messed with, everybody on board is fine. You have oxygen.
No, it's the next
If
one
you
up.
as an individual, something happens and you leave the ship,
Show off camera chat.
if you go too far away from it, you're going to go outside the bubble, you're going to have a bad day.
All right, I'm getting Mr. British to show you. And it was, you have to.
Yep, hold on.
He's getting it.
Working on it.
Oh,
there we go. Bring up the hammerhead.
So that's the hammerhead.
Yeah, so
that's the ship that my party just found and stole.
Right, so this is an example of one of the ships. And so this is, again, the fantasy setting.
Yes.
You have very fantastical ship designs.
Oh yeah, they don't have to look like a Spanish galleon. They don't have to look like a submarine.
Yeah.
They don't have to look like the Enterprise. They can look like anything.
So,
and some of them are made to go actually on water as well.
Right, and otherwise they can just go belly on the ground, or they put anchor up next to an asteroid.
And they just float.
Yeah. So there's a lot of interesting things. The nautiloid type ships, it looks like a nautilus,
go.
but
So
when you see one, you know that
bubble.
the mind players. There we go.
Yep, I got that.
So, and to talk a little bit more about some of the setting specific things, they use a gravity plane straight through the object.
Mm-hmm.
Even a character. So if a character is flung into space, they have a gravity plane, and that personal gravity will take an atmosphere bubble and that sort of stuff. So you can kind of go explore harsh environments without spacesuits, but you might have limits. But yeah, so there's actually the profile of a nautiloid, so you can see it's a nautilus sort of ship. But
it's a very large ship.
So you either have straight down or straight up, and you could walk and do a bit of David Bowie from Labyrinth, and you flip over the gravity plane.
Right, because everything on the below that line, the bottom is that line.
Yeah.
So if you're on top of that line, the bottom is down.
Straight, yeah.
So what about the cargo hold right through the middle of the ship? Is it zero gravity?
No, there's a very thin line. A very thin line. This side, this is the bottom. This side, that's the bottom.
Okay, and so if you're standing in the middle, does it compress your top and bottom to itself?
No, now you're just being goofy. But here's one of the things. So when you take the two ships side by side, their gravity planes align. But if you take a ship like this, you'll have a gravity plane here, and then you can jump off onto the deck of the other one, and you'll rotate.
Right.
So they make it very easy. You don't have to get super worried about like gravity and jumping from here to there or these awkward motions.
They have to be close.
That is the other thing. But ship to ship boarding is a big feature of this, and space combat's very cool.
Which is why the Hippo guys have two blunderbusses and a sword. Because they're very piratey.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and show them off. We mentioned a little bit. This is the GIF race.
GIF. Yeah, I couldn't think of it.
Yeah.
Not the GIF.
No.
GIF Yankee.
So the GIF are probably the more iconic race out of this setting. And then, of course, we have the very famous space hamster Boo.
Yes. And
he's got his own book.
Adorable.
He does have his own book, and we got him here.
He has his own book. He has his own book.
Yep. So giant space hamsters are normal size when they're on Earth.
Reminds me of Hansky from Overlord.
Yeah.
Do not let your players play one of them in a normal campaign.
Yeah.
Don't.
A giant space hamster fighting orcs in the dungeon's a little
hilarious.
But so jump off a couple of things here. I want to talk a little bit about the setting. Yeah, there he goes.
There he is.
No. Start with the phlogiston.
The phlogiston? Or?
Yeah.
Just phlogiston.
So
that doesn't exist anymore, according to 5th edition.
It's different. This is why we're going to talk about it. So Mr. Producer had the Astral Sea, but we're going to bring up the Phlogiston and talk a little bit about how the setting has changed as we get into what you can find as far as maps go for this setting. So as we've talked about these settings in the context of world building, when you go to add onto or create your own different areas now within the Spelljammer or accessible through Spelljamming, your maps are going to be quite different because you're having to consider, heavenly bodies and stuff that you wouldn't normally. You're like, where's my town? Well, it's on this planet, and this is how the universe is done.
Or asteroid.
Yeah, at that point you get an XYZ grid coordinate.
So it becomes a little different when you sort these maps. And if you grab the second edition material, I want to show you here where you didn't travel the Astral Sea. The prime material plane was composed of the phlogiston. And this comes from an ancient Greek concept that was a flammable material. And they thought that when you burned wood, for example, it was expressing the phlogiston from that material.
The phlogiston was the thing that was burning.
Right. So in second edition, you'll find that ships, when they traveled, the phlogiston doused all flames, and to cast fire spells ended you very quickly. Because the fire spell went off, centered on you, and you took critical damage.
I was about to say, there was actually a critical hit table associated with that, and it made bad days all over the place.
So it was a little bit different than what you'll find in the 5th edition setting, but you'll also notice that we're talking here about crystal spheres. Yes. And so that's a bit of a difference when you're between 2nd and 5th editions maps. But I also want you to see that with the expanded material from 2nd edition, there's a lot more locales on the Phlogiston map than what you'll see on the Astral Sea map from 5th edition. Go ahead and pull that up for me there, Mr. Producer. Should be the next one up. But we're still using the same nomenclature. So if I want to go and take my Forgotten Realms characters over to do Dragonlance, we're going to Kryn Space, is what they call it. So we're going to go from Realm Space, and we're going to head on over to Kryn Space, and you can see that on the screen now. But in 5th edition, rather than traveling the Phlogiston through the prime material, what we're actually breaking into the astral plane. And so we were breaking over to the astral plane, and we were able to dip back to the prime material where the two intersect, which is a concept that we see a lot from later publication, Planescape, where we're dealing with intersectional planes and portals and traveling across the multiverse in the way that they set that up later. But this change, I think, will help as we get Planescape later on. We're going to get Planescape soon to be able to make that transition from what we have now into the new Planescape material that much easier. And so just a little bit of a difference there, but you can still see that there's pockets of different space that you go to, and that is where the adventures are. So just as an example, a little bit earlier, I've got Kryn Space there.
Yep.
So this is, again, we're talking about maps. This is atypical of, I need my town and my castles and my villages, and my orc lords are over here and so on. Now we're dealing with Kryn.
Yeah, this is the solar system for Kryn.
Yeah, so, but you'll see Kryn is, I think, the 2nd or 3rd planet in this system, and we've only got 5 or so to deal with here.
Yeah.
Now bring up Gray Space, which is Greyhawk. We haven't.
That one's fun. I like the asteroid field.
Juby Joop is not on there.
But I can still smell Uranus.
Give me Gray Space 2 first.
Gray Space 2 first?
Well, it's
Gray Space 2. What happened to Gray Space 1?
You didn't switch it.
I know.
I gave him too much to do today. So this is kind of an interesting, because I want to, like, cosmologically, Oerth, which is where Greyhawk is.
Yes.
Is the center of their galaxy. It's the center solar system. So you'll find Oerth in the middle.
It's like Oerth and then like 3 moons.
2 moons.
2 moons.
Then the sun.
No, that's 3 moons.
That one's not a moon. That's a Death Star.
It's a
Wrong game system.
I run too much Star Wars. Anyway, but what's interesting, I wanted to show you guys this. You can put anybody as the anchor for your solar system. And this made the Orthodox Church of Greyhawk very happy to find out that they were, in fact, the center of the universe. So,
when you're making your maps, there are some individuals that try to make their maps very true to geography as we know it, astronomical indicators as we know them. It's a fantasy game. It can be anything you want to be.
Well, see, that brings me to the randomization tables in the second edition book
We'll get to that
for
in a
making
second.
your own maps and stuff. Like, there's a really cool randomization table for putting your universe or your solar system together. What kind of planets you'll find.
Right, and we get that in
Yeah.
just a second. But it's what to Troy's point. If you're going and you're, as we talked about, in some of our other parts of this series, you're building a more traditional world setting or expanding into a world setting. Yes, we understand that this side of the mountain will have more rain than this side of the mountain, geographically, and those sorts of things. But you don't have to worry about that when you put your world setting together. You have to create the world setting that's going to be interesting for you to tell your stories in. So you don't have to sweat those scientific details, right? So we can put Earth in the middle of our solar system and have the sun over there, even though we understand that gravity and mass works differently than that.
Yeah, it's for thousands of years we thought the Earth was the center of the solar system,
Right.
and now they think it's flat. So I don't know.
And
Anyway, it's a fantasy game. You can design it and create it any way you want,
You can actually have
So
flat
they
worlds too.
so that the story makes sense in that world. That's the important part.
yeah, and this setting is very well received. It's a lot of fun because of that flexibility.
Yep.
So as Mr. Producer mentioned off camera there, you can have disc shaped, you can have apple bit, big crescent moon shapes. There's really kind of whatever you can imagine. Some of the ones that are more interesting is it's large asteroids in a pocket of atmosphere that do this clockwork sort of internal rotation within themselves. And you can end up with some really wild locales that provide interesting backdrops, their own sets of problems to overcome as you're going through your stories, traversing the different places. Even if you stay within, say, for example, realm space, there's a lot to do within realm space on its own before you even jump over to Kryn or go into the plains.
So you got the book there for the adventure. And in that adventure, they have the island nation of Brawl.
Yeah.
And it's a meteor that has all the joy of home. And Spelljammers come and go. It's a trading commerce, and it's like a giant city in space.
Yeah.
So I don't know how well you'll be able to see it up here behind Borris.
Mr. Producer there.
Working on it.
The rock and roll.
It's there, trust me.
Yeah.
But it's the in the adventure book of the 3-book set that 5th edition has published so far. There's an adventure that takes place there and from there,
Yeah, one of the major
and to
locales.
there. In fact, it starts off with got to figure out how to get your characters there.
Indeed. And so that's the Light of Zarsis. Deals with some astral elves shenanigans.
Oh, there's an Illithid ship. That's not good.
Yeah, there's a lot of things in there.
Yeah.
So the adventure is cool because it gives you a great flavor for the setting of Spelljammer
Yes.
with
Yes.
its own unique problems, challenges, and you encounter mind flayers and those things in the different contexts to really kind of give you an idea of what to expect when it comes to the Spelljammer setting.
I, for one, am hoping that they republish a lot of the other material from 2nd edition for Spelljammer. I think as the world setting went forward and they had some time to deal with it, and they released other box sets and other books that were supplement either adventures or supplements that had dealt with building other characters or how to build ships. There's one's a captain's log. It's just nothing but ships and ship combat.
Yeah.
And it's fantastic. So I hope they go back and re-release some of that material too, coming forward, because this is just a wee taste.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it's definitely gives you everything that you need to get started. Like we talked about with Ravenloft. So Curse of Strahd with Van Richten's Guide really starts you off in Ravenloft, but there's a ton more. The PDFs for all the old materials are like $10, or you can have the book reprinted on demand. And then if you prefer the originals, eBays and different collection sites will have those out there. It's been a while.
They're not cheap.
Yeah, and it's been a while since I've seen one in person, so you may have a difficult time finding one at your local game store's used section.
Yeah.
But it's worth a check as well. It's just you're just
They're rare.
I mean, yeah,
They're rare.
they are rare. And let's talk a little bit here.
The maps?
Well, the maps are going to be kind of interesting because you're going to end up with locale. But if you're running the adventure, it's got it's mapped per location. It's got the character description, some really cool NPCs, and it's going to be what you need to get started. So as you pick up the 3-box set, you're going to get the Astral Adventurer's Guide as your character options and your DM information for the setting. Boo's Astral Menagerie is going to give you all of the new monsters stats and different things like that, new threats. And then the adventure itself, the Light of Zarsis, I think I'm saying that correctly, will take you across realm space, wild space and beyond. So that is the 3-book set.
And
there.
the book set also comes with a DM screen that have sitting over here. On the inside of the screen, it has lots of tables that are helpful for doing combat and space stuff.
Yeah, so it's like the other 5e screens. This is it's been adjusted for this adventure. Oh, hey, I hadn't looked at this one yet.
Oh, there it is.
So
Is that the air bubble?
that's
the
your
air bubble.
And Mr. Producer, can you get it up there? Da-da-da. So, and the map of the Astral
Larry,
Sea.
there it is.
But very, very nice box set to get you started, and the DM screen has got the references that you'll need to be able to run that smoothly. And one thing we haven't mentioned yet a whole lot of...
Are the different dragons and shit that are in there?
well, aside from that, but the art. This has got some of the best art, some of the most art in any of the books. And so there's going to be a lot to really spark yours and your players' imaginations, set that setting up in your minds. Because it's space, a lot of times we'll see it and you think, black backdrop with pinholes. Well, and there's a lot more stuff in space than you expect there to be.
Just imagine this, right? So there's all kinds of crazy monsters and stuff that live in the oceans, right?
Yeah.
Just imagine what kind of crazy monsters are going to live in the astral sea.
Yeah, we were like, oh wow, barracudas and stuff. We're like, well, that's within the first 100 feet.
Well, yeah, it's like I found this 140-foot long squid in the sea. It's like, well, I found this chromatic dragon in the astral sea.
Yeah. And space whales with cities on their backs.
Yeah.
And any number of things.
Spelljammers with also cities on their back.
With also cities, So let's talk a little bit now about some of the cultures and things that you'll find that are a little different. Even the familiar is going to be unfamiliar as you get out into space. So the astral elves.
Yes.
They're very imperialistic. And they take the high elf stick and they really get it up in there. Those will be, at least in the Light of Zarsis, that's going to be your main protagonist, so you'll have an opportunity to run across them. When it comes to role-playing them, don't forget to look down on everyone. There's a lot of that actually in Spelljammer because they are literally looking down from their spaceships on everyone all the time.
All the time. And it's a way they design their ships too, so that the captain's area looks down on his own people too.
Yeah.
So
you'll see that. Other things we're gonna run across the GIF. Little brother, you like to say that they were along the lines of the Mandalorians.
Yeah. At least that's how I've heard them described in the books. Very small communities, very like militant, very bounty hunter sort of.
Right, they're I wouldn't call them militant. I'd call them martial.
Yeah.
And that's a little different
because they're not an army.
Yeah, and so they're not. Yeah, they're not. So militant almost has like a tyrannical edge to it, but martial is they're very much in for the adventure, in for the fight.
Yeah. A lot of the times you'll come across GIF as like captains and stuff on ships or independent bounty hunters.
Often portrayed in classic military style naval uniform.
Yep.
With those sorts of turn of the century style black powder weapons.
Yeah.
So when you run across the GIF, they tend to be an honorable sort, and they tend to. At least I've always played them as sort of loud, happy, ready to go on an adventure. That classic English gentleman that went into the Africa for the big game hunt. That caricature is sort of how I present
And
them.
because he's a hippo, he can't have a handlebar mustache, but he requires one.
No, I put one of mine on anyway. Fine
Or
mustache.
the mutton stash is what it is, right?
Yeah, that was. We can look at more of that, but so dwarves, like they're still mining stuff, but now they're like in asteroids
like a lot of their cities and stuff that they are still mining, they had to bring the stuff to mine with them. So like they mined it and then they built a ship out of it and they continued to mine the ship.
Yeah, they're like, we're gonna crack this mountain off of this thing, put a giant engine on it, and fly it across. But it lets us fly somewhere and mine stuff at the same time.
I would point out though, they do not ever land.
No, yeah,
No.
actually, you always
can only land once.
yes, because they took it with them. But you're still gonna find them to be industrious. You're gonna find, but you're not gonna find them in the warrior context we see very often.
Not very much
in Faerun or Greyhawk,
right?
Where you're gonna have that dwarf cleric that I love to play, or the dwarf fighter type.
They're very very curious, very inventive, very tinkerish.
Yeah, they're closer to their gnome cousins in this setting, and so a dwarf artificer would be a great character for this setting.
Very technology really controls their.
I like to play them toward the direction of like the Warhammer 40K side, where those dwarves have like machine guns.
First, that's the dwarf artificer.
Yeah.
So one of the other races that I really like is the auto gnome.
Yeah,
These are little robots in space. They're made. They can do a variety of things, but also the way the game system is set up here, you can be one.
Yeah, and so that's you playing R2D2.
Right.
But they're not relegated to the mechanic role. They're a fully autonomous character.
Right.
But they are a construct, like you'd see in Eberron. But they are 4 foot tall.
which also makes them an extreme variety. You recognize them as a race because they're all robots,
right?
But no two look alike because they all have their own history, their own how they came to being,
right?
And how they got their consciousness and why they left wherever they were created and brought up. So they're a very interesting race. That they're the cousins to the automatons,
the
Modrons.
Yeah.
Thank you. The Modrons from the plane, the mechanical plane, Mechanus.
Yeah.
So they're like cousins of them.
For sure, and they definitely, I think more than any of the other races, sort of start to open up that multiverse, that cosmology that we're going to start to really see as you get into Spelljammer, and we're going to later get brought into.
See, I think the big thing is that you see a lot of the Mechanists, the Mechanists buttons.
Buttons. You can do it.
Button.
I believe in you. There you go.
So a lot of the Mechanists, they're very reminiscent of like water heaters and laundry machines and stuff like that. So the big difference I feel like is that a lot of the Mechanists are electric and that those guys are carbureted.
So the Modrons were very clockworky in their descriptions. Yes. They were also very unique in their shapes. So like clockwork and steam was sort of where they went. Where these guys don't necessarily exhibit those same sort of clockwork quirks.
Oh no, they got the V8 with the carburetor sticking out of their
I wouldn't give them that much power, but cousins for sure, related, similar in concept to the Modron. You can check the Modrons out in the 5th edition monster manual, and they'll give you kind of an idea. But they have their own unique racial abilities, modifiers, and that sort of stuff. And you're gonna find them in this setting just about anywhere you find anybody else. So the other one was the Plasmoid. Do you have that there, Troy?
The Plasmoid, is it the water guy?
Yeah, the water looking guy.
Yeah. Whatever you do, don't stick a straw in his head and drink him.
Yeah, they don't like that.
No. No, they're wow. For longer than you can remember, you've traversed the astral sea.
Yeah, so they're in concepts they can be a creature that has been changed by their time, affected by the planes. That's one of the big features of Planescape is how each of the planes will affect people. But the Plasmoids were interesting, and they were a big feature of the 2nd edition content as well.
Yeah, he's made of water.
He looks like he's made of water. Some of the other cultures that we're going to find, they're featured heavily in second edition, a little less here in fifth edition. Were the Nyogi. They were a half spider monster.
Oh yeah, like a spider snake thing.
Yeah, and then bring up their web spinner.
Yeah, that's a cool ship actually. They're pretty fast.
So yeah, in terms of their stats, but they were a slaver race, and so they weren't featured as heavily in fifth edition as we're trying to get away from some of those harder concepts.
Yeah.
So if you do go back to some of those older modules, you'll see them featured. Of course, bring in the themes of the game that are appropriate to your game. But their ships were really interesting. They look like a big spider, and they've got webs and grappling, and their goal was to capture your crew. And so they can be an excellent jumping off point, right? Just like any low level game where you get a knock on the head and you wake up several hours later in a cage with a bunch of your other new companions.
Yep.
Yeah.
Something came from space, a giant spider, and then now you're in space when you finally break out and you begin that adventure to get back home.
If you're out camping at night,
Yeah.
you're going from point A to point B, and it's a 2-week travel, and you have to camp at night, and you're taking your 8-hour short rest or what have you.
Yeah.
You wake up, stripped your underwear in a cage with one of these guys.
Yeah, and now you're in space.
Yeah. You were just kidnapped by aliens.
For sure. Skip the probing and move on with your life.
Whoa, hold on. Skip the probing.
So,
Yes, please.
and then the other one I want to highlight are these the bug super will be I guess the Thrycreen. And they've got quite a lot of variation as well.
Oh, the bug dudes?
Yeah, I didn't grab any pictures of them. But an insectoid or humanoid layout kind of looks like praying mantis, except in a humanoid setup. And they're a very neat race as well. They've got some...
So we've already ran into these guys in movies.
Yeah.
Galaxy Quest. The bad guys in there were giant grasshoppers.
Yeah.
With an eye patch and a scar.
Yeah.
For sure.
They had a spaceship with rockets. Yeah.
Well, he didn't have an eye patch and a scar until he got his ship blown up the first time.
Which was fun. But they sort of remind me too, the big grasshoppers, if you saw Bug's Life.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's how I sort of imagine, but with like a mantis head, so they're very much more a bug. But it just goes to feature the uniqueness of this setting, right?
Mm-hmm.
So hippo men, bug people, plasmoids. I mean, and these are the playable races. So there's a ton of other things that are out there too that you'll encounter that are going to be your threats.
So here's the thing: if you're the DM putting this game together, use your imagination. Look at any other sci-fi movie you've ever seen or series. Look at Babylon 5. They had insectoid people.
Yeah.
On Babylon 5.
Mm-hmm.
They had their own little translator that they carried around with them.
They were really well executed in that too for practical effects.
Yeah, you could use your imagination, draw off that inspiration of any other sci-fi for any kind of creature. Doesn't have to be an insect.
Yeah.
They'd be the Gorn from Star Trek.
Mm-hmm.
Giant lizard guy. Beat the crap out of Kirk.
That is
any of them.
That is actually one of the other threats I was going to mention. Second edition featured lizardmen as a prominent and pervasive threat.
Yeah, they were everywhere.
So lizardmen, they, instead of just being in the marshy lizard creature that would be a problem maybe for a barbarian race or something in the lore, now they've come from space.
Well,
and they are bad news. They're hyper intelligent. Their reptilian physiology gives them several advantages for climbing, jumping when they attack, and they always attack in number. So lizardmen are going to be a very common threat here too, which is kind of fun. Just because when you encounter lizardmen like in Faerun, they're the loincloth, spear, tribal sort of stuff, and then here they're the full sword wielding, armor clad. They've got a spaceship. They're legitimate. And on par with the other player races and other threats you're going to encounter.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a fun way to see even classics, those things that we're familiar with, and the orcs as well, space orcs, are going to be cast a little differently in the setting to give you something that's familiar but fresh. And they're still very much a threat. It's very cool.
Very much a threat. I think everything's a threat.
for sure. It gets a little different here as we discuss then some of the history. So a lot of settings, when we talked about Forgotten Realms, has 35,000 years of history.
Oh yeah.
So this one, the history is the cosmos.
Yeah.
And there's a little bit that touches on this, but history is going to be more important locale by locale.
Yep.
So as you create these different places, or you come across the Spelljammer itself, it's going to have a history. But similar to any other astral body, you're like the moon. How was it formed? What is its history? Who's lived there or not?
Well, even culturally too, right? Because like each place is going to have its own history, and that history is going to build its own local culture as well.
It can, yeah. So Tortuga versus an imperial port for sure.
Nassau versus Jamaica.
So as you go through the Light of Zarsis adventure, there's going to be primers and some background information for each of those locations. But as you branch out and go further, if you create a new locale, a new asteroid or world, the history of that is going to be up to you to create. And so just like any other world setting, you'll need to be sure that you've got enough background for that setting to at least bring it up to speed to where you find it at present day.
Well, plus, every place doesn't need to be an ancient installation either.
But this is also true. So
maybe you come across a mining encampment on this asteroid, but maybe they've only been there like 10 years.
Right. Or it's a prospector. And
yeah.
But, so it's just going to be a little bit different than when you're talking about, I establish a city-state in this part of the map, and it's got this king and so on and so forth. While those things will still be important, you're going to find it in a different sort of context with Spelljammer than you would Faerun or Greyhawk or a traditional fantasy setting. What did you find over there, Troy?
All the ships.
Yes.
There's a very brief description.
Yeah.
Pretty decent drawings to talk about them.
Which book are you in there?
This book is the Astral's Guide. It's the one with the GIF hippo on the front.
And we do have the fancy art. So the Astral Adventures Guide around page 55 is where Troy's playing at with the ships.
So be sure to follow at home.
If you've got it, for sure. But one of the things that's fun, going back to culture, your point there, Mr. Producer, each of the cultures has different ship designs, things that are important to them, things they want to express through their artistic design. So
different purposes too.
Correct. Yeah. So while Age of Exploration ships on the Earth all had a sort of similar setup because we found what worked as a technology. In space, we'll see this with other space settings, Star Trek, Star Wars. Each culture ends up being sort of identifiable by their construct and the way they build ships and the color palettes they use, the purposes of their ships a lot of times, and where you'll find them and that sort of stuff. So it's really neat to see when they brought all this information starting in second edition, where we get a large variety of these very fantastic designs.
This is pretty funny.
Okay.
This is something that I would do. So,
Uh-oh.
The city of Brawl is where they're wanting this adventure to take place.
Yeah,
and they're talking about you're taking your adventure people and you're sending them there, right? Mm-hmm. You're sending them there. So where's one of the first places that all adventurers go to once they get to a new city?
The pub.
The pub. The Happy Beholder.
If I'm going to be in space, I'm going to be drunk.
The Happy Beholder. This prosperous tavern is owned and run by Large Luigi, a local famous, lawful neutral beholder. Luigi has an encyclopedic knowledge of all sorts of topics. He's more than happy to share information with just about anybody. He's very civic-minded, well-liked citizen who has no political ambitions. His tavern is rarely troubled by bullies or thieves because he's a beholder.
Right?
But the picture, can you imagine if you were a traveling adventurer?
Hey, Mr. Producer, see if we can get that on up there.
If you're a traveling adventurer,
terrifying. I like seeing a beholder in it of its own is bad, but seeing a happy beholder, I think, is even worse.
Well, then he's they're not small creatures.
No.
You know, they're about 6 foot in diameter beach ball, and so he's gonna hover on over and like, how are you today? So
You're new. You haven't been here before, huh? And yeah, the brave adventurers are gonna want to pull out something. And
Good. Yeah.
that reminds me of the first time we ended up in Planescape, and you go well, and this is one of the things that's fun about these sort of these settings that sort of shift your expectation. Because when you come across an orc, you come across a beholder, you come across something that would normally be a fight on site, and now it's trying to serve you a drink.
Yeah.
yeah,
You know, if your players are role playing their characters well, you're still gonna have those guys that are like, holy crap, and draw steel, and you know it's gonna end up being a very interesting scene, a very fun scene to play out because you've got what these characters are expecting, what these characters have seen before.
Well, not only that, but from like a player perspective too, right?
Yeah.
Because like you take them from, let's say, Greyhawk, right, where you've been in the dungeons, you've been killing orcs, maybe you've fought and killed like a lich or something, right? Like that's your these are your bad guys, and then you get taken out of that and then put into the city of Sigil, where you have orcs over there, they're having a party, nobody's really paying attention to them. There's a lich over here that's trying to serve you breakfast. Like,
Well, I got ate by a water puddle.
yeah, so like it really pulls the players out because the players have that confusion. They really don't know what to do. It's
and,
really cool.
And the same thing here, where we're gonna find in Spelljammer, particularly as we go through the module, you're gonna end up with these really cool scenes for. So you know, if you've joined the hobby recently and you've only been in 5th edition, this is definitely going to be fresh for a player and a DM. So it's going to be a lot of fun. And you've had a lot of fun. You played a little bit with Spelljammer back in the day, but you ran a lot of Planescape when it was new. So tell us a little bit about, as a DM, Troy, those moments when we're going to get into fresh and crazy and unexpected.
Well, as a DM, I played a lot of Forgotten Realms. Played some with the vampire
Ravenloft.
There, Forgotten Realms, Ravenloft, Dark Sun. I played in everywhere, and I ran a lot in Greyhawk. I was very intimately knowledgeable about Greyhawk. So I played in pretty much all the world settings that were available at the time. And in the early 80s, mid 80s, they came out with Planescape. And when I first saw it, I sat down in Barnes & Noble, opened the box, and read it. And I said, this is freaking amazing. Because it took everything that I already knew about all the known worlds, so to speak, in D&D, and it showed that that was 1% of everything that is out there. Because everything that we have played on, that I have played with, is on the prime material plane. And the prime material plane is one of 54 planes of existence.
Yeah, and even
the astral is one, the ethereal. Then you got the planes of hell, the abyss.
Sure, and, and then even here to Spelljammer with 5th edition's adjustment from the phlogiston to the astral.
Yes.
We're still only dealing with 2 of the 54 planes.
So originally they were traveling to phlogiston, which I believe meant that they could only go to worlds of the prime material plane.
Exactly.
If here, since they're traveling the astral sea, does that mean they can go in between the different planes of existence?
Potentially.
Not all of them. The astral plane does not touch all of them, but does touch a large number of them.
And it's going to be, so as we anticipate Planescape being brought into 5th edition later, I don't remember if we get Greyhawk first or Planescape first. I think we're going to get Greyhawk.
I think we're at Greyhawk.
But, this opens the door, but we're still, like I said, dealing with 2 of the 54 planes of existence. But to Troy's credit, in the same way here, that we have the Dragonlance module, we have Ravenloft, we've got all of the content that's Forgotten Realms. We've got your homebrew worlds and things like that. So if you want to have some sort of justification for bringing something in from somewhere else to your homebrew world, this is going to do it. Because it gives you a way to connect those things.
Yeah, especially if you have, say you read about a bad guy, and he turns out to be your favorite bad guy ever, but he's on another world of existence.
Yeah, you're like, oh, I can't go borrow the Lich out of Tomb of Annihilate. Yeah, you can.
Yeah, you can.
Somebody went and found him and brought him over here. Why? I don't know, but he's mad.
He's mad
What the
about
hell is
it.
IU's doing here? I don't know. He wants to be. Are you going to go ask him? I'm not.
But the ships in the Spelljammers give you the ability to move monsters or other player characters or non-player characters around one or the other.
Mm-hmm.
And like you were talking before about the spider people,
Yeah, the Neo Geek.
they kidnap you.
Mhm.
And so now your characters have been forcefully introduced into Spelljammer. And it's very similar to one of the things I like to do to the 0 level character is introduce them to slavers. They just going through your little village, and now you're with the slavers. It's a very it's not a very fun experience.
No.
But the whole challenge then is to escape them and learn all your skills. I mean, you're basically just a kid on the farm before that,
Yeah.
and then you learn how to fight. Very basic. You learn how to make a fire, how to bandage wounds, how to cast a spell. Those are the fun days. When you, as a 0 level, try to cast a spell or work a wand, those are very
It's like Harry
fun.
Potter in the magic shop.
It's exactly what it is. And very fun days, especially as a player character. So whether you're being taken by slavers that are here or taken by slavers that take you up on a UFO, it's the same effect. It puts your characters now in a harsh environment that they've no idea what is going on, where they're at, who these people are.
No support network.
No support network. They're just thrown into it face first in their underwear. Yeah. But your players will really enjoy it. It'll be challenging. Don't make it too challenging, because players must be able to win the day at the end of it all. Nobody wants to die a hero. They want to live a hero.
Well, especially as you're telling the story and not just running the game.
Yes.
Which, but I wanted to, to what I was talking about a second ago, those fresh moments, Troy.
Oh,
So tell us about some of the ones that you had in your games for when we got it, because you did Planescape.
yeah.
But the same idea applies here to Spelljammer.
Absolutely. So your fresh moments when you expose your players to a brand new idea that nobody has ever thought of before. You're thinking about something like that?
Well,
Like when he was stepped in the puddle in Planescape and it tried to kill him.
Oh,
Like just weirdness off the wall.
so
kind of
believe
stuff.
it or not, that introduction that I did for you guys, those are little snippets that I took because I read the whole thing.
I know.
And I'm like that. I'm the guy that reads service manuals. I'm that kind of nerd. So I read the whole thing, and the little snippets that I used to introduce you to the strangeness of the world setting came from different modules or different adventures throughout the different boxes that I had at that time. The little girl who was selling you black rose stems with no roses on them.
Yep.
That turned out to be Razorvine.
Yes.
Yes, and the paladin in the pub kicked her in the face to get her away from him,
Yeah. So
Well, the weird thing is that nobody else reacted to it.
and nobody else reacted to
nobody
it.
else on the street. So I think that's going to be, I think, what I'm going for here. So as we're talking about getting into Spelljammer, right, and the things that are going to subvert expectation. So as we get, so the scene is we're in the city, everything's new, we're losing our minds, and there's this small urchin girl, right? So that's a sort of known quantity.
Small urchin, short, maybe 8 to 10 years of age,
Right, but
dirty, tattered clothing, matted hair. Please, sir, can you spare copper?
right, but so that's something that your players can understand, and your characters would understand. And then, so a human paladin, shiny armor, on horseback, comes riding down the street.
The obvious good guy.
Radiates lawful good.
Yep.
Something else that your character understands, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So as we're setting these things up, like you understand Beholder, that's because it takes you sideways. So the paladin ends up kicking this girl in the face when she asks
Away from me, child! Boot!
when
the
she
face.
asks him to buy this black rose stem with no rose on it.
No rose on it.
So one of our players comes over, and of course,
Hero!
Yeah. Feels
Like-
bad for the little girl.
right, and so then he buys the rose stem, and she's excited, and that's all good. But I forget. I don't think he planted it. He did something with it, and it's Razorvine.
He's holding on to it.
Yeah.
And it's an old magic item called Razorvine. You have to look it up so you get the whole description of it.
Yeah.
So
But
he's holding on to it, and the little girl, thank you, sir, giggles and runs away with her shiny new coin.
but it basically,
It pricks him and
Yeah.
it bleeds.
and that's the
And that's
catalyst.
the catalyst. Yeah.
So it's the same thing like the druid spell, the
Razorvine.
yeah. And so you go poof, and you do this area. Well, now you're holding it
You're holding it.
in the tavern. So you see this right outside the tavern. You're like, oh, cool, I did the thing. Let's go get a beer. And then he's messing with it. And so in the tavern, and this like Jack and the Beanstalk style
Jack and the
expansion
Beanstalk.
giant with razors and vines and
Up through the floor and destroys the tavern. People are screaming and running in fear. The whole tavern is just splinters of wood and things are just shoved everywhere.
So, these are the fresh sort of moments I was talking about, where we take what we can we've seen, we expect,
Not normal.
and we understand,
Like a space whale.
right? So, but then it's got a twist to it.
Yes.
So we understand a pub, we understand ship, and so we can kind of get our heads wrapped around space. But if your players have only ever seen beholders as an enemy, as a threat, as a bad guy, and you walk in the door and one's sitting there floating in the corner,
Serving drinks.
Asking where you would like to sit in the bar.
right? So depending on how you present the scene, you can definitely have a lot of fun in these introductions, these subversions of the expected for your players.
Oh, also in the city of Sigil, okay, everybody knows large cities have to have, just because it happens, they have to have a mortician.
Yeah.
And the city of Sigil, being a large city, has a mortician who has a group of people that work with him.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the mortician is a demi-lich,
Yeah,
and over half of the people who work for him are liches.
or lesser undead.
There's all forms of undead, and they work for the mortician because they like to hang out in graveyards because they're undead. So one of the things that happens when you're there is a parade because somebody has been killed,
Yeah,
and they're taking his body to the morgue, and there's this parade with the mortician and several other of his working staff. They're carrying the body and they're headed to the morgue.
yeah.
If you have a cleric in the group with you, they will become unhinged at that moment.
Yeah,
Because
there's
there
a
are-
lich walking down the street.
He's carrying a body.
There's more liches.
Yeah, it's like Lich A and the Lich B, like they're going into concert. It's crazy. But that's the other thing too. I forgot. Undead don't need oxygen.
Nope.
Yeah.
You can just rock up on an asteroid and there's a bunch of zombies. And what are they doing? Being zombies, minding their own business.
For inspiration in those encounters, I would direct you towards Pirates of the Caribbean movies.
Oh,
Yeah.
When they just jumped off the ship and floated down to the bottom of the ocean and started walking to the
Yeah.
beach.
Take a walk.
Take a walk.
What, not on the ship? Nope.
No.
Take a walk, boys.
Because of the setting, these moments and these sort of ideas, these things that you couldn't necessarily normally do, are more commonplace and can be executed with a lot of flair and really make for this like high fantasy space adventure.
Yep.
That's very cool.
Definitely use your creativity.
When we get into some of the things that we would expect to find, so the beholder is a lawful neutral entity. So we're gonna go
This
from
one is.
this one is. The governments that we're going to run across are going to be similar to governments you'd see in your other settings. So this town with this mayor and the town guard and this sort of things, all the way to your lawless, like pirate ports and
they're gonna-
undead and then the illithid with their own governments and laws. And,
Yeah, the governments in the different lands and the different
Yeah.
ships and the different meteors that are turned into hotels are going to be such a varied, from a town mayor to a council to kings
well, one of the things
to
that
all kinds of people.
Yeah,
will be,
parliamentary systems and everything.
well, one of the things that'll be prominent is the shipboard law.
Yeah.
So if you might brush up a little bit on your maritime stuff, because while the captain was the captain, the quartermaster had a lot of power over that
Yeah.
and how that ship ran. And so there can be some things that you can do aboard the ship and the way that you structure that crew that will really give you that sort of maritime, I'm on a ship feel, outside of just, oh, look, there's some space whales and we have sails and we're going from place to place.
So also watch the Love Boat and see what kind of stuff Captain Spaulding does.
Love boat. So, but that is to say, when it comes to these different locales, we're going to find government structures that we're used to seeing in other settings that we've maybe created for our own homebrewed settings.
Yeah, the general structure, they're going to be the same. You only have about 7 or 8 different government types.
Right.
Don't forget about some of the space-specific rules that you're going to need to have because you're in space. So dealing with stuff like limited food and water or your refuse.
Well, that's not specifically government. I'm talking about like what you're gonna encounter, what you're gonna find, right? So thieves guilds are still out there,
right? But I meant like how the government because if you're in Faerun and you go to the market to buy some food, that's completely different because there's the woods right out there. You can go get another rabbit.
Well, that's gonna be more along the lines of what the cultures are gonna find important.
Right. On this island.
I meant how the government is going to run those systems. Like, how do you deal with a trash service when you're in space?
You just kick it off the rock.
Yeah.
Everything has to be imported to what he's getting at. Everything has to be imported like you live in Hawaii.
Yeah.
Everything is brought in by ship. Everything.
Air would have to be. Because of their own rules, that asteroid would run out of oxygen.
Yeah.
According to their own rules.
The air would go stale.
It would have to be imported.
Unless it's got some magical means, yeah.
Or, I mean, they have plenty of greenery, so...
but that's going to be, again, so a lot of times, particularly like when I've run Star Wars and you've got very much outlaws or smugglers, that's going to be something that you can do here in this setting. So, we're smuggling in things like it's perfectly fine in this port, but those guys don't want it at all.
Right.
If you introduce bunny rabbits into a place where they don't have a predator, then you end up like that Japanese island covered in bunny rabbits.
Yes. So much so where the ecosystem can't actually support anything else.
At this point, it's changed the biome.
There's too many rabbits.
Another island like that is these miniature deer.
Yeah, similar.
Yeah.
So definitely there's
Japanese.
I don't understand.
I don't know.
But governments are going to be very, whatever type it is, you're going to be able to run across. The government's probably going to be your harbor master, your taxes, inspections. If you're smuggling, the thieves guild's going to want their cut.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you're going to have the structure of how the ship is run, and then that crew. You're going to run across government types that we're similar to, but then of course, very much on your maritime side. So if you want to get some additional flavor, you can check out some of the write-ups for Waterdeep. Has some really good stuff in the docks.
Oh yeah,
the things that they do. Dragon
yeah.
Heist and some of those Waterdeep modules will have some additional information you can bring out of there and put it into the different locales to really bring life to that that port.
Also, think of the places that they're leaving and where they are going to. If you're using a Spelljammer ship as a form of transportation for the group, where they're going to and where they're coming from will have influence over their government style and just laws in general, taxes, when that ship leaves port, when it comes into port. So there are going to be a lot of things to consider.
Well, not only that, but if you go from, asteroid A to asteroid B, and, this asteroid's in America and this asteroid's in Canada, you have different currencies.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so maybe the governments aren't going to play too well, or maybe like the exchange rate between the two is going to be a little bit different, like you were saying with different...
and that's depending on your game, that's definitely a complication you could add. Like, Dark Sun dealt with steel, while everyone else deals with gold and copper. Maybe the automaton people will need more steel and will be willing to barter outside of a universal currency. To keep that from being a complication, though, you can stick to gold.
Yeah.
And the regular currencies and just sort of, keep that, just sweep that under the rug, unless some of these traveling complications are part of the story you're telling. If you're trying to be more focused on chasing the bad guy and saving the day, maybe we don't need to worry about what money is in our bag. But if we're more, especially at like the earlier or lower levels, we're being the spacefarers, we're being the adventurers and the heroes.
Yep.
If it's about the more exploratory side of things, then running into currency complications, languages that you don't know, or these different things can be really good flavor for your game. It will help bring additional life into that setting and really immerse your players.
Let's keep it going with the commerce. So like raw materials turn into what kind of products for export, guilds, caravan routes, bandits, foodstuff, minerals, lumber, all of it. If you're living on an asteroid, everything's going to have to be brought in. Everything brought in goes through the harbor. Everything going through the harbor goes through the taxes. So, your grilled rabbit here is going to be very expensive.
Yeah. If you want to build a wood house on a moon rock, and instead of like everybody else just uses some moon rocks, for sure you're gonna end up your HOA is not gonna like you.
Mahogany.
And those sorts of things. So definitely like any maritime setting, and particularly with Spelljammer, where you've got that aspect of things, commerce is going to be a huge part of the world setting.
Oh, yeah.
Not to mention, a lot of the commerce would actually go into a lot of like the cultural like lore and stuff like that.
Oh yeah,
There's a bunch of guys coming back from India back in like the 12 and 1300s that would just spin these extremely tall tales about how dangerous it was because they didn't want anyone else to go and get spice to sell.
Oh yeah, and a lot of it there was real danger, but you exaggerate a little bit. And that dragon on the map, yeah, he's actually there.
Yeah, that's a real dragon. Yeah,
That's why they put him there.
yeah, he's
So
coughing up fire because he's got all that cinnamon. You don't want to deal with that.
but one of the things that was interesting was that race to find new trade routes. Race to find that could be a very cool. So you introduce your characters to the setting of Spelljammer. They complete the Light of Zarsis and they save the universe.
Well, the old D&D job protecting the caravan because it's from bandits.
Exactly, but this is what
that job is here.
Now that they're out in space, they were decent adventurers before, and now they've got this new opportunity.
You get you the Spanish galleon.
Dude, you're gonna have to pay me so much money. Yeah, I need you to protect this caravan while on its way to this asteroid. Protect it from what exactly? Illithids mostly. Yeah, so I need like a lot of money.
Here's an old rusted pot.
So
A colander.
you finally get up to a Spanish galleon with 3 decks of cannons that you protect the caravan with.
Yeah,
and
so,
just fire a broadside. Yeah.
But as far as the stories go, well, that was the big thing with like Han Solo's ship. It made the Kessel Run in less than 12 parsecs. Well, he was able to plot a route through this crazy anomaly.
Right.
That ended up being very short in terms of actual distance traveled. So we saw this too in where they were trying to reach India and China more quickly. Like, we're just going to set sail from England and go that way. Well, they ran into America.
Yeah.
So they thought they were coming around the other side to China. But it was in an attempt to find new trade routes.
Yep.
So, once your characters are out in space, or if you want to introduce them, or even your start at space, because that's one of the things that you can do in the Light of Zarsis, start in space with the GIF or other races that have been in space for a while. But if they're either protecting caravans or they're explorers themselves trying to find new routes, you go the Star Trek style and find new cultures and stuff. Lost artifacts, treasure hunting. Where this culture has this myth about something. We couldn't find it on Greyhawk, but it's actually there in gray space.
So you can borrow stories from Star Trek, Star Wars, where this culture went out into space and colonized. But they're a dead race now. They've been gone for 10,000 years.
Yeah.
But they left behind these clues to this religious artifact on these different planets.
Yeah, it's Cthulhu's tentacle wing.
It's his baby pacifier. Yeah.
For sure. But with the background of commerce, there's a lot of story hooks that will let you explore that.
Tons.
And then in the backdrop of Spelljammer, you can take that anywhere, run across anything.
Let's look at raw materials. You got an asteroid. It's being mined.
Yeah.
Well, your job is to ride shotgun on this shipment.
Mm-hmm.
So you go there with an empty ship, and you're going to pick up so many tons of this cargo. And when you get there, you find out that they are using children.
Yeah.
They have children dwarfs, children illithids, children whatever.
Or we can go more, back to the Cthulhu route where they're all like mind enslaved by illithid.
Yeah, so some of those space undead showed up.
Yeah, there you go.
So now you present a quandary. Do they rescue all these people? Do they fight for their survival?
Definitely, yeah. Those complications can really take a mundane, that sort of blue milk run.
So just because they're out in space doesn't mean all these great story hooks that you use to introduce drama and deadly happenstance to the party. Just because it's in space just means that your maps have changed and your terminology has changed. It's the same story hooks.
And it doesn't eliminate dungeons either.
No,
you know?
no, absolutely not.
So for sure, you're like, okay, that's a city, but the cave system inside an asteroid and all that.
One
sort of
further,
stuff.
like that Star Trek episode where the Enterprise was stuck inside an asteroid.
Oh, yeah, you get your ship stuck inside an asteroid. How fun would that
How
be?
cool would that be? Yeah.
No.
That sounds like a bad day.
That sounds like a great adventure. A lot of great adventures are bad days.
But that's these sorts of problems are cool because if you do have that artificer, dwarf, or what have you, now they're solving this problem in new ways. It's not just I shoot the bad guys or I cast my spells. It's how do we get our ship out of here? How do we repair it? How do we get this cargo? We're trying to make it here in time to save the space princess. Whatever it happens to be.
Turns out she's at a different space castle.
Dang it, different space castle with Space Mario.
Turns out she's not a princess.
Yeah, she could be a Koopa.
She just looks that way. Yeah.
So definitely with the background of commerce, but you got to remember, trade is going to be hugely important because everything is essentially an island.
Yep.
Until you get to a planet, but then the planet itself will be part of like luxury goods. Like I can only get this berry from that floating planetoid over there.
Oh, remember a couple episodes ago we were talking about ways that your player party discovers that this bad guy that you keep running into is involved here because he loves these chocolate-covered strawberries that only come from this one island. Well, now that he has chocolate-covered strawberries, they only come from one planet.
Yeah.
And you find a box of them in the storage hold of the ship that you're hijacking. Now, where was this thing going? So that's where this guy's at.
And you can imagine, right? So we're gonna start our guys off. They're in space. We're doing all this stuff. Well, this leads us back to Faerun. Right? What?
Yeah.
Oh, now we're playing Ghosts of Saltmarsh. Or at least parts of it. We're gonna then he escapes again. We have to go back into space to chase him. We come over here and we end up in some other module or some other part of something, or we have to like teleport or.
Let me tell you how I remember the night that we were playing in Planescape. They were using Spelljammers heavily to go from here to there.
Yeah,
and get things done and move the adventure forward very quickly. And I remember I can't remember the exact what was presented, but here's the thing, and you know that it's back on Greyhawk at this guy's castle. You just found the proof, and they're like, we don't want to go back there. Let's go over here. And as a DM, you have given them a spaceship that they can go literally anywhere. So you can't say no, you can't go there.
Yeah, there's no dilithium crystals.
Nope.
There's no gas.
That's when you Star Trek it and be like, oh no, you guys went through a wormhole.
Yeah.
Sucks. You're at Greyhawk anyway.
Which is not impossible, but
not impossible.
It's definitely one of those things with Spelljammer, because you can. You're just like, set a course. Where? There. I don't know.
Yeah. They go anywhere. Literally.
General that way direction.
Yeah.
For sure.
So our next we'd like to talk about is magic and tech.
This is
in
interesting.
Spelljammer, they have both.
Well,
lots of both.
They do, but spell jamming is a magic.
Yes.
So the act of actual taking magic and converting it into propulsion, spell jamming, is a magic. And it used to be in second edition that wizards would either spend mana points if you used their alternate mana system, or spell slots to provide propulsion. And so typically the guy running the helm was your wizard or your cleric. Fifth edition, if you had something similar to that, everybody's got sort of spell-like abilities, and it opens up the that job to sort of most of your classes now, which is kind of cool. But I forget where I was going. So magic and technology, but that's a magic. So
well, the technology that would be involved there would be the helm. You need the spell jamming helm in order to control the ship, but you still need to do that magically.
But it's a magical construct,
right?
So when we're dealing with the technology, we've got ship construction techniques. We've got black powder.
Got the Gith running around with blunderbusses and black powder.
So which is not something you're going to see commonly.
There's ships with cannons.
Faerun, but then we've also got ballista, which is more common across a lot of the other settings for their siege weapons. But yeah, so we definitely have quite a bit of mix of things. But it's still in that fantasy vein where most of it is magic.
So even the dwarves are flying around with their own forge or making just more weapons and stuff, right?
Right, so they're hammering
they're
out.
still mining their own city and still building weapons.
Right, so it's not like you see oil derricks or gasoline refineries or those sorts of things, but yeah, most of it is very much a magical bent with some technologies like black powder that are more available.
So, and as you read the descriptions on the different races, pay very close attention to the very few lines that lead to what type of technology only this race has, this race doesn't.
Or prefers. Yeah.
You as a DM can exploit that and design a cool weapon or some kind of feature that's only on their ships, a cool spell.
Well, the GIF, for example, are quite large. They're like 6.5 foot tall, very much like tree trunk in build.
Yeah.
And so if you can imagine that when they build a blunderbuss, the kick it's got might not work so well for your halfling character.
No, you're halfling.
So he's
hilarious.
got, Newtonian physics equal and opposite.
In space. Yep.
Yeah,
So he goes, pew, ah! And now you gotta go pick him up off of the space rock when the fight's done. But those sorts of things can be quite interesting too, because yes, there's blunderbuss, yes, there's pistols, but this is a gift made for a gift to use, and so he's higher caliber, larger powder loads, or any number of things that can be sort of tailor that technology. We see that even in regular stuff. The swords that an orc will use versus what a elf uses versus what. So you're going to see that as we get into what the bug people use and the plasmoids prefer and those sorts of things will start to mark. You come across a scene with a downed ship and a bunch of miscellaneous stuff scattered around. You're like, oh, well, I've got a lot of this type of material. I got a lot of these kinds of weapons, or the make is such as, which is not uncommon to the investigation you'd lead when you come across a caravan that's been ransacked. You're like, oh, okay, we've got like a dead orc, or we've got orcish weapons, or those sorts of things there.
So also the magic in Spelljammer, there's literally pages of spells and how they're affected, and they're affected anywhere from not at all to just doesn't work here.
Yeah, depending on which wild space you're in and the spell's effect, and even being able to see, hear, and understand those certain requirements for charms and enchantments, those are going to have different restrictions or complications.
Complications. A light way of putting it.
Oh, dude, I like to complicate the stuff out of things. So, for sure. And there's some, you'll find a lot of that in the Astral Adventures Guide in terms of, magic, how it's affected, where it's affected. But it's also one of those things that's very effective for combat. So if you do end up with ship-to-ship combat, aside from your blunderbuss and catapults and hook weapons, lightning bolt, fireball, and those
Fireball.
those sorts of things are going to be prevalent in that ship-to-ship combat.
100%. 100%. So let's talk again about monster.
Well, I want to mention with illithids being such large or more prevalent in the setting, we tend not to use psionics in our game. It can be quite game breaking, particularly in the older editions.
Mainly because the rule that we have is that if our players are going to use it, my monsters are going to use it.
Partly true,
like
because
Dad's modified armor stats, my monsters have armor stats,
which is fair. And when we prefer to sort of even that playing field because our games have a little bit more lethality. There's consequences. Your actions have consequences. But if you want to bring in those psionics rules, it can be a great way to sort of level the playing field against an illithid. When your ship is being attacked by mind flayers, you have psionics to combat theirs with now.
If not everybody, one or two players.
Yeah, but definitely you may go back and reread them, and because there's some really cool classes, the psionic blade assassin, and some things like that, which may not fit in everybody's Faerun setting kind of game, but definitely have a place in Spelljammer.
They can definitely have a place in Spelljammer.
Yeah. So aside from magic, you might be able to bring in some psionics. And that'll make it'll add that extra dimension to Spelljammer. It's very cool.
I think psionics would classify as other threats. So
well, it does. So that's the other problem now, as we're talking about monsters and other threats. They don't have to eat you. They're going to break your mind first and then eat you. So and that's if you don't stare into the void for too long and go crazy.
Very true. When you do lore and other points of interest?
No, monster type. So we talked about like the illithids.
Well, one of the things that I'd like to do with mine is
break out the...
so here, I'll pull it up real quick. Actually, the hammerhead.
Yep.
So I will make a real quick point.
Chat.
Everything that's listed as a monster almost is the same list as that are player characters. So
Also true, but we get some really interesting setting-specific ones I wanted to bring up. Jammer Leech. A Jammer Leech is a barnacle-like creature that begins life as a space-dwelling spore that attaches to the hull of a spell-jamming ship, with a leech inside as a larval form. A spore that remains attached to a ship for a few days punctures the hull and begins to develop a hard shell that roughly matches the color of the hull. The shell is affixed to the ship by a glue-like substance secreted by the leech. The shell grows until it's about 1 foot in diameter. The leech inside is reddish-purple in color with a body resembling that of a snail. It has a single watery eye at one end of it and a spiked tentacle protruding from just below the eye, which it uses to defend itself. So here we go. A Jammer Leech damages the hull of the ship to which it is attached and absorbs magic from the ship's spell-jamming helm. So this is some of the specific threats that you can find. And while that might be a problem to sort of deal with as a character at a character level, ship maintenance and threats to the ship beyond threats to the player characters exist in this setting and can end up for making a really interesting encounter. You know, whether you're trying to get somewhere and the ship feels like it's down on power because you've got leeches, or you've anchored to a rock and you've got to go scrape them off of there like a barnacle when you're getting ready to go into port, because we have a lot of water protection laws here in our state. So if you put your boat in the water, you go out on the lake, you have to clean it off so you don't take that stuff and bring it into another waterway. Similar, you might find where they want you to scrape all those barnacles and leeches off because they don't want it on their rock.
Yeah, before you pull it in port.
Ecosystem type stuff. But that's one of the other kinds of threats you're going to find in the spelljamming wild space and astral sea.
Yeah.
But one of the things we haven't really talked a whole lot about, they are out there. Space dragons. I can't do that too much. But
that particular one lives in a sun.
Oh, here, let me do this, Matt.
And what's fun about the suns is a lot of times... Hey, bringing it up. There you go. The suns are oftentimes described as being portals.
Yes.
To the plane of fire.
Astral plane of fire. So then you'll find a lot of the nasty stuff that lives on the astral plane of fire walking around on the sun.
Yep.
But you can't really approach the sun because you take 46 d6 damage per round. And so good luck with that. But ancient solar dragon. Yeah. That can make for an interesting chase scene. Use the chase mechanics out of the DMG. And then they've got different ages.
You die, she dies, everybody
Space
dies.
eels. Hey, a space guppy. That might make for some good eating. A little bit of... yeah.
And then get space salmonella.
But I love how everything's just space, right? There's space swine. It's literally a flying pig. Space mollymock. It's a
space bird.
Space bird. Giant hamsters, because why not? But the menagerie is definitely very cool. Oh, okay. We had solar dragons. Now we have to have lunar dragons.
Well, yeah.
And the artwork for this fantastic. Show that up just a little bit, but
that is pretty cool.
So it is still a Dungeons and Dragons settings, and you're going to find new and interesting types of dragons to kill your players with.
Yes.
Oh yeah, the PCs, not the players. So whatever. Sorry.
Thank you.
Kill the players.
Characters. Kill the characters.
All right, guys. Today we're doing an escape room. Good luck.
Yeah. What do you mean? Well, you're locked in here with a dragon. So in the book set for 5th edition, the Astral Menagerie is going to give you a lot to draw on that's very specific to the setting, a lot of new and interesting threats, and it's going to definitely provide you a lot of backup when you're running the adventure, the Light of Zarsis. So if you need to modify an encounter, say you're bringing in some higher level characters into the adventure, grab some new threats or modify. Don't just add more that can draw out combat encounters, but really bring out something cool from the setting.
Well, not only that, but don't forget thematically whenever you have something else coming into the astral sea. So the
Being like a tidal wave.
Right, so the encounter that I was talking about here was with the Hammerhead when my players killed everyone on the ship and then stole the ship, which, I mean, I guess they were technically pirates, so it's not really a bad thing. Anyway, so the whole thing is that ship was docked on an asteroid. They were undergoing emergency repairs because they were being chased by somebody. Right, so the players come across, they get this story, and then that somebody shows up. Right, so I just have this like portal thing that opens up as kind of like a dimension door with a torrent of water that comes flying out of it as another ship comes sailing off of that water.
That's pretty cool, actually.
And then I had them be a group of Sahagin, because the guy that had the Hammerhead, which is a shark, is a hippo. So I had all of the other guys on the Hammerhead also be like polymorphed animals.
Right.
So, kind of like what you would find in Chult.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like Sahagins on their giant fish versus, you know, these animal people on the shark thing. It was just, I don't know, it was a lot of fun. But, you know, thematically, when you're trying to have one, you have something with gravity merging into some place without gravity, you have to kind of think how that's going to look, and whenever you explain to your players.
Yeah, that's one of the things that we always coach on in our workshops is scene setting, really being descriptive and building that image in your player's mind.
I think that right there will give the biggest kind of like we're not in Kansas anymore moments, you know, because it's like, oh yeah, we're in planes, we're in Spelljammers, we're on spaceships, and there's illithids. But unless you actually describe it, like you're not, like you guys really are in space. You have to drive that point home.
Yeah, and you can do that through your descriptive language as you set these scenes for your players.
Yeah, with different monsters and threats, or even the same monsters, right? I was using Sahagin.
Right, but
fish people,
but in a different context. So,
right?
For sure. You even when you're trying to get across, you know, these new monsters. What is a Neogi? What is the three Creeve? I can never say them right. The bug people, a plasmoid. You know, how do you describe this so that without just turning the book over and say you see this?
Yeah.
You know, give it a shot for sure, and sort of build that image and let your players have that moment of discovery if they haven't seen it before.
And then let them decide if it's a new threat.
That's for sure.
Because I've done that before in Ravenloft. I would describe the scene, but I wouldn't set the table up so my players didn't know if it was a combat encounter.
Until it's chewing on their leg. Damn werewolves.
Well, this was a green hag with several skeletons. Like, she was just over there hanging out on the bridge, and everyone's like, what do we do? I'm like, I don't know. This is what you see.
Yeah.
For sure.
Don't ask me what you do. No.
So, it's a green hag. It's a green hag. Go ask her what to do. I'm sure she'll tell you. Like,
now, as we look at the lore, as we're going to be talking about a little bit of the world building that went into Spelljammer. Obviously, the Spelljammer, spelljamming, and the spaceships are going to be probably your biggest key piece of lore at the forefront of this setting. So that's one of the things that was interesting, particularly about second edition, with each of the major spacefaring races having their own ship designs. They also had their own methods of propulsion. Fifth edition has made that way easier, where you just have the spelljamming helm and you don't have to worry about it too much. So if you'd like to make some adjustments, that information's out there in the second edition box set. But the ship designs are still varied by race and culture.
Yep.
The one that we find in the adventure are we're dealing with was it astral elves. So they've got a large space empire of astral elves. So obviously they've got their history and how they came to be and what their interests are and how they prosecute themselves and that sort of stuff. And then the same is going to be there for like Spelljammer generally, but each of these different cultures are going to have their own lore, exploration, and the way they interact with, or how that lore, background, and understanding changes the way that they interact with the world around them. So it's to really dive into Spelljammer for lore. I would recommend that you spend some time with some of the books if you can, the old books. And there's a lot of guys that are playing second and fifth edition Spelljammer that have great YouTube videos. So you can go get a lot of ideas, lore information, and things like that, because there's a ton. We've got all of the things that we know about mind players. Then we add that they're from space. We got everything that we know about beholders, and then we add that they're from space. And then when you start to get the dwarves and things like that, just really starts to take everything we know, and we've got this whole other layer on top of it. So whether these dwarves are related to the ones we know or not, in this case, they're generally not, but depending on how you have the setting, if these guys were originally from the mountains over here and now they're over here, or that's where their ancestors came.
Well, I think like some of the lore would be more useful if you wanted to figure out. So like I think it was Realm Space, there was that planet of Drow. Yeah. Right? So the lore there...
That's in Gray Space.
Yeah.
So in the Greyhawk setting, Drow don't exist.
Right.
Until Spelljammer, and then they're on a moon.
They are on their own planet, their own space.
Yeah.
Right, so like... at that point when you're going through and you're trying to figure out where they come from or what you're trying to do in the local area, a lot of the lore means a lot more. So,
yeah, and that becomes locale based. So if you have the Gray Space companion book, all of that's going to be in there for you. If you have the Realm Space companion book, each of those locations and their lore and how those guys got there and what they do is going to be in there for you.
Mm-hmm.
And those will be things that you need to keep in mind as you create your own place. So if I create a pirate asteroid town, how did it come to be? What are the stories they tell? Who are their heroes and villains and that sort of stuff that go into the lore of that local area, that sector of space, or what they're trying to accomplish.
because
I
I think
do want to mention, we talked about, we've hit this off and on through everything today. We brought up the second edition write-ups for Spelljammer.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of material that was printed back in the 80s for Spelljammer. 3 or 4 different box sets, all kinds of different books, accessories and
it's
stuff.
like 15 books. There was a comic book set.
Yeah.
And
I got one of the
second edition. Was really good with their compendiums.
there you go.
So what I would suggest, if anybody is out there who is able to find any of this material, it's very easy to convert to your 5th edition campaign.
Right.
Use it for resource, use it for story.
Most of that exists on
Background?
PDF.
Yeah, you can find it in a variety of places. So just depends on how much you want to find and how much you want to spend on it.
Some of the lore I do want to touch on again here. If you could, producer, bring up the Astral Sea.
Yeah. Because that's something that's changed.
Well, aside from something that's changed, I mentioned how it did change, but that is going to be, the biggest backdrop. Aside from being on the Spelljammer, doing spell jamming, the Spelljammer, the mythical ship itself, traversing the prime material plane via the Astral Sea is going to be sort of the largest feature, the lore, and your points of interest, all that sort of stuff is going to be done here in the Astral Sea. It's going to be what you interact with. So it's either the Astral Sea or Wild Space.
Yep.
So those will be things that you'll want to make sure that you're really familiar with, because it's the backdrop upon which all of the stories in Spelljammer are going to be built on. Particularly as we get Greyhawk and we get Planescape later on, and you want to move into those new areas, then you're going to, having that familiarity is going to make that transition much easier. And some of the things that you've got to remember is that you're in the astral plane, and that's got its own set of problems, which Troy is ready for here too. So bring that back
Get
up.
you back over on the camera 1 there, Dad.
Yeah.
So this is another second edition book. It's a hardback. It's called Manual of the Planes. And out of this book came the entire world setting Planescape that takes up 2 milk crates worth of stuff.
Yeah.
But everything that you need to know to travel the universe safely is in this book.
Well, I want to show off here, bring that back up. The monster that's on this cover is called an Astral Dreadnought. So look that up.
What did you call it earlier?
yeah, it looks like a beholder with crab arms.
Crab arms. So that's one of the threats that you'll find on the astral plane.
Yes.
So as you go across the astral sea, the astral plane has its own threats beyond hey, I'm on this asteroid. Hey, these spell yourselves. Hey, the illithids.
You run into one on your way down to the corner come and go.
Well, the other
It is a
trouble-
tremendous resource for anybody that wants to go into Spelljammer or getting ready to release the Planescape settings.
yeah.
This book is a tremendous resource for anybody that wants to know what's out there.
You can also find more information in the DMGs
Yes.
when they get into their cosmology. They've changed the cosmology a little bit between the old editions and the new editions, kind of rearranged some of the relationships of the planes. But the information's in there. So, if your ship gets knocked out of hyperspace, as it were, as you're traveling from one wild space to another, you're going to be stranded in the astral plane. And that can have its own kind of problems. So
It will.
Break out the rowboat.
yeah. And that might be one of the ways that you have people communicate, right? Like, oh, I need to contact that ship. Well, where are they?
Oh, yeah,
they're
have them
sailing.
drop.
Well, they're sailing the astral sea, so then you use astral projection, and be familiar with the problems you can encounter while doing that. So there's a lot of things to consider with Spelljammer that are really cool, but it's to like effectively branch out beyond the adventure is going to test you as a game master just a little bit, in that it's meant to help you combine everything that's available. So you have to have a little bit of knowledge about what's out there, so that you can write a story that's really kind of interesting, that shows that off or brings your players along as they go across the astral sea into wild space and beyond.
Yeah, I would suggest not taking them there until they're about 5th level. Typically, by 5th level,
Forget what the
player characters can survive relatively easily.
I forget what they
I think that one was what, 5 to 12 or something
1
like that?
to 11. I forget what they do. I've read so many of these things; they're blurring in my brain.
That's not
Is
the
that a
reading.
Romulan ship?
Just about.
Engage cloaking device. Yeah.
Okay, so like this is broken down into the fun times of Seeds of Destruction, Terrors of the Void, Chaos and Doom Space. I wonder if that's where Doctor Doom's at right now.
Let's go.
So, yeah, but even here they tell you you're going to be running into some problems.
Page 1, problems.
Yeah, I would
Doesn't tell me here.
take them in there when they're at least 5th level. That way they're going to have skills and possessions that are going to hopefully see to their increased lifespan.
Yeah.
It'll give them some more tools with which to confront the new problems they're going to be faced with, and allow them that creativity to do that with. So,
And then they might actually have a use for that new language they just learned as they're screaming for help while they're being eaten by a beholder.
he's
he
chewing
saying?
on me.
What's he saying?
That's Narthol the Garthak.
Narthol. There we go. Narthol the Garthak.
So
Neck.
Great neck. Some of the things we do want to mention that we've seen that have been things that we've heard from other game masters as they go to run Spelljammer is that ship-to-ship combat is not necessarily one of those things that's been fleshed out very well in the 5th edition materials. The 2nd edition books do have a good ship-to-ship combat, but it's made for the older edition and can be a little complicated. So I wanted to point you guys out to these other books if you haven't seen them yet. Ghosts of Saltmarsh is a really neat sea adventure.
Here, put it back over there, Matt.
Way over there,
Yeah.
I can't reach.
Yeah.
I'm 5'5".
There you go. So that way Dad can...
It tilt it maybe, but it's dark over in that corner.
I can't see it.
It's fine.
It's
But
fine.
Ghosts of Saltmarsh has some really good ship-based rules, and for both, you can kind of see that. So for building, modifying, repairing, as well as ship-based combat. One of the things I like about the Ghosts of Saltmarsh rules is that they allow the players to take different positions on the ship. And that gives everybody something to do in a combat encounter, with the eventual goal, ideally, of getting the ships side by side for boarding, because that's really what the game system is sort of designed around. It's in so that your barbarian manning a cannon might be fine, but the barbarian's really going to shine when he can take his 2 broadaxes to the other guy's boat. So that's very cinematic too, right? We're going to do our combat. We're going to do some of this stuff. Ideally not drawing it out into a game of Risk, But to have this cool ship-to-ship combat and then get your players involved and then hopefully board the other guys and save the day. But Ghost of Saltmarsh is one of those books that's got a decent and robust rule set that a lot of game masters have used to augment their Spelljammer books to provide a little bit more fleshed out rule sets for ship-to-ship combats even in space. And then the other book that we see get used a lot here.
Descent into Avernus.
Yeah, Baldur's Gate, Descent into Avernus.
They got some really cool machinery in there.
Page 216 in the appendix, they've got these infernal war machines.
Yeah, I love the name.
Because they're for killing demons. There's some really interesting rules here that are also very compatible with Spelljammer that again allow for different vehicle actions, party positions, and weapons that you could apply to Spelljammer to enhance your ship-to-ship combat, give it a little bit more flavor before eventually you kind of have that big cinematic boarding.
Now, I will say this: when I get the Ghost, or not that one, the Spelljammer book, they had in their section, right? Because this is the boat stuff out of Ghosts of Saltmarsh, and then we got
it's around page 50 there.
Back over here. The thing that I do like is that they've basically turned the ship into the creature.
Well,
right,
no,
so whenever you have ship-on-ship combat, the ship, as far as the rules that I can have for each round, is like it takes 3 actions for this ship to do this thing. So, like, if you're trying to turn or load the cannons and fire and stuff like that, that kind of shows that you and the crew have to work together to do this thing, and the ship as a whole can only do so much in a round.
Right.
Versus something like Saga's Edition, whereas the pilot controls the ship, and then everyone else kind of does what they want, which I think makes for more fun ship combat.
Sure, and that was the one thing that I was going to mention is borrowing ship combat from space-based games or other naval-based combat, because they do end up with a hex grid
somewhere
for space combat in 2nd edition, and so other hex-based games can make for really interesting if you want to have more like Armada battles. That could be very cool to be the setup to like your end game. So you have to break through the enemy fleet and then make it to your objective, and finally you're back on the land and that sort of stuff. But the Star Wars Sagas Edition was a 3.5 derivative. In their book, Starships of the Galaxy, it gives you tons of rules that are very compatible for building, modifying, and crewing spaceships.
Yeah, I literally ripped those straight out of 3.5 when I ran that little bit of Spelljammer.
Yeah.
Because I was like, all right, this ship has 6 cannons. I'm just going to take the cannon off of that starship, and then we're going to roll dice just like normal. And then out of here,
Put yourself on
it
the
has,
cameras.
Yeah, that's true. I can do that.
You're the producer.
So anyway, on the book,
Just so everybody knows, us here at iwannabeagm.com and all our associated stuff online, we're looking for a new guy that can run the cameras. So if you
I'll
have
go on
any
the other side of the
experience,
camera. I'm not supposed to be on this side of the camera.
It's all right.
But so basically, like, because in here, right, it takes, you have your ship stats,
Yeah.
right, and it literally goes like, here's your ship's hit points. So like, all right, cool. Well, now in that Star Wars book, it says that I'm throwing 2d8 whenever I shoot my cannons. So I'll just take that 2d8. My ship has 300 hit points, and I'm shooting cannons now.
Yeah, so there's different ways to do it. If you really want to spice up the ship combat, it's the one criticism that we've heard about the Spelljammer rules, where, if you want those more long, drawn-out ship-to-ship engagements, you're not going to find a whole lot of that support in Spelljammer for 5th edition, but there's different, even within 5th edition, Descent into Avernus, Ghosts of Saltmarsh have great rules that already exist that you can just fold in, apply it to your Spelljammer ship, or you can branch out into other compatible systems to get even further space combat before finally you get into boarding. Once you board, it's all your regular ground-to-ground stuff, and that's really well defined, so it's very easy for that.
So I would also put out there for DMs who are looking at Spelljammer because there seems to be 2 different levels of the combat.
Yeah.
You have individual combat once you've boarded, then you have the ship-to-ship combat.
Yeah.
So understand from your players, if they even want to do ship-to-ship combat, it can be drawn out, it can be lengthy. to do
Right.
things.
Depending on how it's run, for sure.
Right.
We've
So-
had to do that, like in Star Wars. If everyone's running a gun, everyone's running a thing, everyone's doing
It
those
can
rounds.
be, it can be drawn out.
Yeah.
So find out from your players beforehand if they want to play it out or if they just want you as the DM to story it out. Oh, there's a big epic fight. Part of the ship is on fire now. They crashed into an asteroid. You got away. Something like that. Or if they want to play it out, because you're looking at a good couple of hours to play out just that scenario I said.
Rule of cool in ship
Yeah.
combat is probably going to be one of your best friends. So, definitely do some dice roll. I want to fire the weapon. I want to do the thing. I want a grappling hook. We're going to ram them. We're going to push them into something. Really play it up, because it's definitely made for those sort of epic fantasy encounters. You're in space on giant hammerhead space. It's very cool.
It doesn't get any more epic than in space.
A combination of some fast-paced, allow your players to be involved in the combat, direct the combat, and then the other side of that is the story, the rule of cool, the descriptions that get you into where we can go ahead and do the combat that's a little more traditional to D&D.
So the way I do exactly how you just explained is that I'll have a set number of enemy on a set number of my guys, right? So let's say that I have a party of 5, and then there's like 15 other guys. So it's like, all right, well, there's gonna be 3 on each of you, and I'll roll percentage dice. This group of 3 is doing 46%. That's not very good, right? I'm looking for a passing grade of like 70 or better. So those 3 guys are gonna have a really hard time against you. And then you roll a percentage, and like you're doing pretty good against these set number of guys. So it'd be way more explanation, way more thematic. That way you can have like larger battles and stuff like that. So if I'm doing like a fort defense, I'll do the same thing.
Yeah, there's some ways that you can
Instead of
turn
rolling
those into
500 arrows for archers, just roll percentage. It's like, all right, well, 80%. That's pretty good.
Roll
You're
all-
gonna get hit by a couple of them.
roll all these things.
Roll all dice 6 within 30 feet for damage.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so definitely if you get into those Armada larger ship-to-ship combats, you treat them as an individual, and then you're going to have to go in and do some of those large encounter type resolutions.
That can be very involved. Research it beforehand and just know if your players want to do that before you get started with it.
Yeah, and then if you read the adventure that comes with this before you sit down and play it, which is what we always recommend, you'll have a good idea of where your players are going to maybe go off with the rails or really dive into something a little
Number
deeper.
2.
Yes. Or they might dive into an aspect of the game a little more deeper in this area or not want to deal with that. And so you'll know your party and your friends and players and how they're going to want to progress through the module and experience Spelljammer.
Definitely. Are we ready for number 10?
I think so.
Yeah, so you got anything else you want to add there, Mr. Producer, on Spelljammer?
Well, I think so. Like the cool thing for Spelljammer is that it's the same cool thing for Planescape. You can pretty much do whatever you want whenever you want to, just because it's always there.
It does give you a thematic access to going and having that freedom to tell a different kind of story across the different realms that we've all come to love.
So whereas something like Descent into Avernus, where you need to have a pretty decent knowledge of Baldur's Gate, a pretty decent knowledge of Ravenloft, because Avernus overlaps with Ravenloft, just to have an understanding of where you are and what's actually going on. Whereas Spelljammer, the only real previous lore knowledge that you need to know is like what Dad said, right? There is the Spelljammer, there is spell jamming, and that's it. You're in space, go have fun. You know what I mean? So it's very open, it's very, I don't really want to call it light, but like there's not a whole lot you need.
For sure, but it does also mean that as a game master in that regard,
It's fairly demanding.
it's got to be fairly demanding. If we're going to go to some random planetoid, now you have to create that.
Right.
So that's one of those things you have to balance as far as how do you like to prep, how much do you want to prep, how much of your story are you telling versus are we going to be running a module or campaign that already exists that's fairly well defined. And what's nice is about the Light of Zarsis is that it is fairly well defined. It gives you the background that you need to go in and run it. It gives you the ability to run it really well. It's a great story. It's a lot of fun. And, even if you go and like, all right, we made it back home and you never go back into space, it's definitely well worth the play. It's a great experience. And this is where I think they did a great job with the 5th edition set here. it's got everything you need to take your adventures into the Spelljammer setting.
Well, not only that, but there's so much that's in Spelljammer that it's just very simple for have your Spelljammer to come into your setting. Like, so you don't need to bring your setting to Spelljammer. It can accidentally happen the other way around, like it did with my party.
Right, which is what we talked about earlier.
Yeah. So there's little things that I like to touch on just before I give my 2 cents here. Spelljammer did come out, first box set, 1989. And since then, it's been growing in popularity and volume of material. A lot of it is reprinted. A lot of it is still out there for purchase. And I would suggest that if you get the box set that 5th edition now has, and you like it, then you ought to go look at some of this other material, as well as the Sin of the Avarice and the other one there. I forget.
Ghost of Saltmarsh.
Ghost of the Saltmarsh. They both have tie-in a little bit, so they give you a little more idea of what's going on. And like Borris is saying, depending on your level of prep for your game, Spelljammer is going to be one that's a little more demanding, I think.
Yeah.
In story prep and in game prep.
Creativity.
Yeah, there's so much more, because there's so much more going on that you're going to have to prepare for.
Especially as you finish up the adventure and you want to continue in the Spelljammer setting.
Well, you don't have a choice. They're on a ship out there.
Well,
they just completed their mission. They rescued the princess. Are they home now? No, they're still out there.
But you could make it so they get dropped off and everyone waves and has a good goodbye and whatever. But yeah, if you want to continue it,
see, that was what was supposed to happen with my story.
Yes, I know.
But instead, they're like, "Oh, hey, look, these guys are pirates. Let's kill them and take their ship." And I'm like,
because you're a fool.
Fine.
But
Spelljammer is one that I would recommend for experienced players that are looking for something more unique and exciting to keep them interested in the game. New players, I would kind of shy away from, because there's so much going on that new players can get overwhelmed. But experienced players should, I think, definitely enjoy it very much.
This is one I knew I'd seen it somewhere. So, Light as Arceus, 64-page hardcover adventure set in the astral plane and designed for characters of level 5 to 8.
5 to 8, yeah.
And so you'll want to have had a little bit of playtime, and so you won't have completely green players or characters.
Yeah.
But this will be an interesting way to introduce new things to your game that will definitely, for a more experienced player, provide that next level of challenge, or give them the option to play something. You know, we all start off with our first character is a human paladin of justice with Justice McJustice. And then by the time you get your 4th character, you're a loaf of bread being carried around by a phantasmal hand, or you're a half chicken, half man that used to be a chicken. But we get to those interesting and because we like to have fun with the game, and those more experienced players bringing this in as an option will definitely give you those options a lot of players are looking for. It's very cool stuff in here.
Definitely.
I think something that really adds to it is that this feels a lot like a Planescape or Undermountain sort of thing, where you can just jump in and out of it with no problems.
That is the other thing that's fun about it, is it does overlay into an existing game very easily.
It does.
Because like you were saying, this was 5 to 8, so you could be hanging out on Greyhawk, let's say, for 5 levels, and then you wind up in space, and then you end up on Faerun going through Undermountain or something, you know?
Yeah.
Well, they drop you off because your adventure is done.
Yeah.
You turn around and go, hey,
they drop you off on a planet.
Yeah. It's like I bought a bus ticket to the wrong station.
You get dropped off.
Yeah.
And that'd be an interesting way to introduce your characters into Faerun, and now they're there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and especially that works well for a newer player that has no idea about the setting.
Or a more experienced player that wants to play a crazier character species.
Exactly. So from either side of things, it can be a lot of fun. But it can also let you take your party, and if you're running, say you start in Dragonlance, and you go through the War of the Lance. Well, then you can jump into space and then go over and do Dungeon of the Mad Mage.
Yeah.
Because Dragonlance, I think, goes through 11. And then, you'll be a little spicy for this module, so you have to amp it up a little bit. But Dungeon of the Mad Mage, by the time you get down into the deep levels and you're dealing with Gith and you're dealing with Illithids and you're dealing with Beholders.
I think, to 16 is the module?
The module takes you to character level 16,
Yeah.
but it's 26 levels of
Yeah.
crazy old wizard stuff. So
Well, yeah, it's
that
more
would,
Keenan.
but it gives you a story, a canonical path to take these guys out of Dragonlance and put them into that dungeon and run them all the way up through the levels.
So
And that-
what I'm hearing is we all love it.
yes.
It is, or will require more prep time on the Dungeon Master side
Some assembly is required.
to make a fun game for the players. New players can be in there. Old players can be in there. I mean, experienced players can be in there. It's going to offer something for everybody.
Oh yeah, for sure. And it's just like when it came out, it was a lot of people grabbed onto it because it was so cool and had all those
It
features.
was so different.
And we see that same thing here with 5th edition.
Yep.
So if you've only ever played 5th edition and you haven't grabbed Spelljammer yet, there's something for everybody, so definitely pick it up. It's very cool.
Definitely.
And if you're having fun with 5th edition Spelljammer, highly recommend looking up some of the older material.
Yeah.
The more information is always the more better.
The more better.
The more better.
More
The more
better.
information is always the more better.
You heard it first here,
That is
people.
that is a direct quote from Drill Sergeant Aho.
Yeah.
Yep. Why do I believe? I believe that.
So, anyway, this has been Dungeons and Dragons Through the Realm Spelljammer. I'm Jester Borris with Why I Want to Be a GM. You can find us at Facebook. You can find us at our Discord server. Tell them about the other places that we can find us at. There, Troy.
Well, you can find us at our .com. That's www.iwanttobeagm.com. We also have still my Swiss.
Well, knock it all out. What's the list there? We got
iwanttobeagm.com. Facebook, I want to be a GM. Twitch, I want to be a GM, which is where we're at today.
Yep.
And also on our Discord, which is I want to be a GM
Starting to
as
see a
well.
pattern here.
And YouTube, I want to be a GM. If you check out our videos, please take a moment to subscribe and click like and drop us a comment or two. We do get around to reading them all. We came across some interesting ones the other day, and just say we love all the positive comments. Give some constructive criticisms, and if you know of a subject that you think we ought to touch on, drop us a line.
for sure.
Be sure to check out our calendar of events. Our calendar is on iwanttobeagm.com.
There's also 417 Games and Events.
And 417gamesandevents.com is a place to go when you need to find a place to go. It's an online calendar that we maintain of events going on in the area, so to help you never miss your favorite game.
I want to let you guys know that we are going to be hitting up Tremendicon. So check out their website. That's tremendicon.com. We're going to be running games live in person, so come hang out with us and get up to some great convention hijinks.
Shenanigans.
Shenanigans as well. That's happening in Springfield, Missouri at the Oasis, July 7, 8, and 9. So hit up their website. It's a creators convention. Creative writing, art, all sorts of cool stuff. It's a lot different than some of your other conventions. And we're going to be running games, as I said, and we'll be glad to be there. So come check it out.
Really good comic artists there last year.
Yeah, I got a lot of cool stuff. So until next time, I'm Jester Borris with I Want to Be a GM.
I'm Troy, the Planescape guy, and the furry one on the end.
Yeah, the actually bodied voice of Mr. Producer.
I'm going to go disembody you.
I'm gonna have to leave now.
Yeah. All right. So thanks, everybody.
See you next time.
Bye.